Hello and welcome to From the Nosebleeds podcast about college football and college basketball, brought to you by myself, Walter Limbeck, and Jacob Wetzel here with me today. How are you doing today, Wetzel?
Doing pretty good. Celebrating 24th birthday today, so what
There
better
we
way to
go.
spend it than with you, bud?
All right, let's get into recapping some of the games. After we recap some of the games, we'll look at the top four, and then we'll get into the games coming this week, as well as looking into some of the bets that we like or we're thinking about. So let's get started first with the Big Ten. Big Ten got welcome back last week, and first up, Friday night, big game, Wisconsin, Illinois. Wisconsin looked great, come out strong, winning 45-7. Graham Mertz, his first game starting, and he goes 20 for 21 with 5 touchdowns. So pretty big statement early on. Obviously, we had the news this week that him, along with several other members of the Wisconsin team, came down with COVID. So that was kind of big news. Anyways, what do you think about the game, though?
Um, I I mean, I think it's interesting. I thought the most interesting thing was seeing Wisconsin not be as run heavy
Right.
offensively as we're used to seeing them. Usually they have a guy that you say, next year, 2 years, whatever, future NFL running back. You look, Monty Ball, Melvin Gordon, all those guys. So I think it adds a new element to what Wisconsin football is. But I think it's just one of those games. Same with the Ohio State Nebraska game. Same with some other games we saw. Is Wisconsin that good or is Illinois that bad? I think early on in the season, that's the question you kind of have to ask, especially with no non-conference games. I think Wisconsin's that good. I think offensively, they always have a good offensive line. Now you add a good quarterback in, you've got to think they have a good running back. And I think in the Big Ten, especially that West Division, competing against Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa, I think it's theirs right now to win. Looking the way they played, obviously the question is just going to be, can they play 8 games at this point? Can they even qualify for the Big Ten championship? How is that going to work?
Right. We'll get into more of that later. We'll take a look at the next game. I agree with you. It's kind of hard to tell. This is the first game for all these teams, so you can't really tell much. You're still trying to figure out a judgment about some of these
Hmm.
teams, especially those who showed very strongly and those who showed poorly. Next game, we got Ohio State against Nebraska. Ohio State wins 52-17. Struggled a little early on. Nebraska kept it tight in the first half. They got blown out in the second half, though. Ohio State's talent really started to show. Justin Fields also went 20 for 21 on the day, had a big game. What did you take away from that game, Wetzel?
First off, what my biggest takeaway was, I know we both listened to Pardon My Take, and
Mhm.
so I'm kind of surprised I didn't talk about this a little bit on there, but man, Coach Day apologizing for that late touchdown to Nebraska. I mean, come on, like that was I mean, the game was kind of a blowout, nothing really going on, and then he comes out that like in his press conference after the game and he apologizes. I mean, that's
Yeah, well, and especially in the era of like college football playoff, like style points
exactly.
matter, the eye test
Yes.
matters, so you can't
Yes.
apologize for scoring.
Right.
You
And
know,
and and we've talked about this too. I know I brought this up to you, but we've talked about the 1 seed playing the 4 seed, same as it was last year, same as it is this year in the
oh,
college football playoff matters because that
yeah,
4 seed, who knows who it's going to be? It's the gap between Ohio State, Clemson, and Alabama and that 4 seed is miles apart. So you look at Ohio State, 8 games. Your schedule's not. I mean, you play Penn State, you play Nebraska, Michigan, decent schedule, but they always have one non-conference game that's always really, really good.
mhm.
You have to score points. You have to look good. You have to dominate your opponent.
Well,
I
especially
don't.
against a lesser team like Nebraska, you have
Right. You have to
all
beat
those
them.
points matter. All those
It, it,
points
it's
matter.
like it's like you have to against these teams. Like Ohio State was a 28-point favorite.
Mhm.
If you don't cover that spread against Nebraska, who maybe will finish in the middle half of the Big Ten, like that's a bad look. You're a
Mhm.
28-point favorite at home with the Heisman candidate and Justin Fields. You have to win. And you said it. They struggled at the beginning. I get that, but I mean, Justin Fields 20 for 21 threw the ball downfield. It's not like he was dinking and dunking. He threw the ball downfield. The only concerning thing to me is they got a couple decent running backs, most notably Sermon, transfer from Oklahoma, and yet Justin Fields ran 15 carries for 54 yards, and he was
Led
their
the
leading
team,
rusher.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the only thing to me that I look at and I say little concerning.
It's also concerning to me, like we said, they struggled early on, and the
Hmm.
defense didn't look really great. And I think the one thing that lacks from this team this year is the fact they don't have any of those guys that jump off the screen at you on defense.
Right.
They lost some
Hmm.
guys last year, and usually
No
when you're talking
Bosa's,
Ohio
no
State,
Young. Yeah.
yeah, when you're talking
Hmm.
Ohio State, you at least have one guy on the defensive side of things that just jumps off the screen, whether it's an edge rusher. They had talent on in the cornerback position last year, and they've had linebackers in the past. I just so far I haven't seen anything. Again, we're
Yeah.
one game in, but uh,
I
gotta hope to see somebody step up on the defensive side.
I think if they go to Penn State, and obviously there's no fans of the Penn State game, but I think if they go to Penn State and if they win, I think they're a 12, 13-point favorite, whatever. I think if they, which this is what I know people have been taught. The Bear on ESPN said he thinks the gap between Ohio State and the rest of the Big Ten is equal to the gap between Clemson and the rest of the ACC. Hence, why Ohio State is on the road as almost a two-touchdown favorite against essentially the number two team in the Big Ten going into the year. I think if Ohio State then proves that gap is that big,
Mhm.
and put a lot of those questions to bed of that first game against Nebraska that people have, like as in, who's the running back and how's the defensive line going to be this year, then I think Ohio State gets up to that number 3 ranking or even number 2 ranking, and they keep it, and
Mhm.
and it's the Ohio State of old, basically.
I'd agree with that. Going into a game I'm sure a lot of people saw, especially the ending, Indiana upsets Penn State at home 36-35. Controversial call at the end, but ultimately, in my mind, Penn State really beat themselves in this game. They had a
Yeah.
lot of
Hmm.
turnovers, a lot of missed opportunities, and they really allowed Indiana to hang around and ultimately win. What do you see from that game?
I agree. It was a lot of bad Penn State, which is what's interesting for them going into their matchup against Ohio State is, if Penn State doesn't beat themselves this game, which you can say this about every football team, but if Penn State doesn't beat themselves, they have the players, the tools to keep it close with Ohio State. I mean, Clifford threw 2 interceptions, and I think both of them were in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Um, they turned the ball over. They didn't finish plays. They didn't finish drives. They just made a lot of mistakes, and then they get to the second half, and it's kind of the same thing, but they're putting points on the board now. They're ending drives, and they basically should have won, right, if that guy doesn't fall in the end zone. So it's like you look at Penn State and you say they have the talent, they have the guys, they have the coaching, they have everything. Can they finish? And that they couldn't do that against Indiana in the first half. It cost them. Can they do it against Ohio State? Because Ohio State's a different animal.
Yeah, we'll get into more of that game later. I've got a couple points on that game.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Next game I want to look at too from last weekend was the Michigan Minnesota game. Another game that was interesting. I mean, this was the biggest game of the weekend in the Big
Hmm.
Ten
Hmm.
coming into the week. Michigan wins 49-24. We've talked about this. I don't know if it really speaks more on Michigan or if it speaks more on Minnesota. They lost a lot on defense, and it obviously showed in this first game. But we'll see more of both teams going forward. And I thought, coming I mean, the score, I don't know if it accurately reflected the game, but I do think there's still a lot to be learned about both these teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest question for Michigan is their quarterback Milton. He played good. He ran the ball well, threw the ball pretty good. Um, I think it's just it's can he be, Michigan's usually a run heavy team. They've had some playmakers at wide receiver, but I think if Milton can be a good quarterback for them, I think he can help this offense become not so reliant on the run, open it up a little bit with the pass. Um, and I think he's going to lead that offense this year, and I think it showed. 'Cause I do think Minnesota's a good team. They had some guys out on COVID and stuff like that, but I think it shows Michigan is a good football team, and that they're a team that I think will be right there with Ohio State at the end of the year, um, challenging for that East spot. And then, of course, it is only after one game, but I did like what I saw from Michigan.
Next game, another team that really beat themselves. They had 7 turnovers, ended up losing 38-27 to Rutgers. It was Michigan State that lost. They had a lot of turnovers, a lot
Yeah,
of
how about
issues.
that?
Um,
How about the boys from New Jersey up there, huh?
yeah. I mean, Greg Schiano returning, and he's
Yeah.
one of the only coaches in the history of Rutgers football program to even finish 500. So speaks a lot on him. I think it's good for them that they got their first win. They've got a lot of transfers, and I mean, it helped out in this game. They didn't really impress me, but they took advantage of all those turnovers and
Mhm.
got a
Mhm.
win, and that's all that really counts in the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, this is another game where I think you step back and you say, is Rutgers good or is Michigan State really bad?
Yeah.
Because I mean, Michigan State new head coach, quarterback that's not the best quarterback I think in the Big Ten, and just a lot of questions for them. And but I do think this is more about Rutgers getting a Big Ten win on the road against a team that's usually at the top of the Big Ten, contending for
Well,
for
first win
titles.
in 3 years, right? In the Big Ten,
Yeah, I mean,
something like that.
it's
It's been a
it's
while.
been a long time. I mean, they're by no means out of the dorm the basement of the Big Ten, but it is good. I know you and I both had Rutgers this week,
Mhm.
and this past week, getting 13 on the road. It's good to see them get a win, and it's hey, maybe they finish the year with 3 or 4 wins, and they kind of get something going, um get some traction in a conference that they really have done nothing in.
Yeah. A lot of people questioning why they're even in the Big Ten.
Mhm.
It's nice to get that win and get their season started on the right foot.
Mhm.
Next game we'll look at team I'm pretty high on, Purdue, winning at home, 24-20 against Iowa. Iowa lost some pieces last year. Purdue, a lot of question marks about them coming into the game without their head coach, without Rondale Moore. Announced kind of suspiciously before the game that he wasn't going to be playing. But David Bell, this guy had over 100 catches last year and picked up where he left off in his freshman campaign with 13 catches, 121 yards, and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah. Yeah. And more, I think they've already announced he's not playing tomorrow on Saturday. I think makes you wonder what it is. I gotta think it's something about. I mean, he opted out, then he opted back in, and I think it's just something with that where he's
He's not
not
on the way in.
mentally ready
Yeah.
to play the season and make that decision yet. But um, I think this is another game where you look at it and you say, is Purdue this good? Is Iowa this bad? Because Iowa lost worse on that offensive line, who was maybe the best offensive line in the draft this past year, playing really well now for the Bucks. And then they lost Epinenza Epinenza from the defensive line. He's on the Bills now, and I think first game back, you don't have preseason, you don't have any of that stuff, non-conference games. It's those are those were key guys that they relied on that they don't just have quite worked out yet. I do think Iowa's a good team, and was talking with one of our buddies who's a big Iowa fan, and you know, I liked Iowa in this game simply because they're replacing their starting quarterback as well, but they're a run heavy team, run first team. I thought that would help them. Um, I mean, they didn't play terrible, right? Like neither one of these teams played terrible, played great. They kind of just it was kind of just back and forth, and Purdue just won because they scored a late touchdown, then got a stop, and that was the game, right? I don't think either one of us came away from this game saying this team really impressed me or this team really disappointed me. Just kind of an average middle of the road game, I thought.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
a true Big Ten game.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And usually, like you said, Iowa's a pretty run-heavy team usually. And you mentioned Wirfs; they lost Wirfs, but they usually have guys coming back in,
Hmm.
and they can pick and plug those offensive linemen back in
Hmm.
and be right back on track. So I'd expect Iowa, to be fine. I don't think too much, like you said, of this game. Last game on the slate was Northwestern Maryland. Northwestern blown out Maryland 43-3. Tagovailoa had 3 picks in his first start for Maryland, the little brother of Tua. They didn't look great. So it's a tough game to really watch. Um, but yeah, I don't have much on this game. I didn't
Yeah,
actually watch it, but Northwestern coming out making a statement against Maryland early.
yeah. I don't have much on it. I think Northwestern's another team you kind of like to see do well in conference play, just kind of knowing their history of athletics. Um, I mean, Maryland's got another game tonight. They play Minnesota tonight at home on Friday. I I think that's going to be an interesting game. I think
Mhm.
the second game for a lot of these teams like Maryland, Iowa, Minnesota, I think they're gonna answer a lot of questions. I mean, I think Northwestern is a decent team, and they're in a division now with Wisconsin being out, where you don't know. You
Yeah,
win five, you go 5-3. Who knows? So
yeah. And speaking of that division, the Big Ten West, I mean, you got a lot of questions. I think it's going to be a dogfight personally.
hmm
Like you said, a 5-3 team could end up winning that division. Who knows when Wisconsin plays again, how many games they play. But you got a lot of average middle of the road teams there that are going to be
yep.
competing against each other. Any team could really win that division. I
hmm
think it's going to be a dogfight, and 5-3 I think might win that division, maybe 6-2 at best.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, I think you got two teams in there that I think in Purdue and Northwestern right now that are both 1-0 that I think, maybe they get a couple of things to fall their way, they could be there. But really, you look at this division and you say it's Wisconsin's to lose, but now they have the COVID issues. So does that mean a Minnesota can piece it together? Maybe Nebraska finally maybe figures something out. But it's a division where I think you look at it and you say, other than Wisconsin, is there any other team that can compete?
That can take control of it too.
Right. Yeah.
Not only
And
compete.
they're given a huge shot right now. I mean, you look at Minnesota. Minnesota could potentially they're 0-1 right now, but they could potentially play two more games tonight and then next week and be sitting at 2-1,
Mhm.
and Wisconsin is still sitting at 0-1 and gets their game this week canceled and their game next week canceled, and then before you know it, Minnesota's sitting there at 2-1 and saying, "Hey, Wisconsin's just not going to play enough games to win this," and then it really is, it's wide open.
Mhm. A lot of question marks about, like we were talking about doing the recap. Is Indiana legit? Is
Mhm.
Rutgers legit? Wisconsin,
Mhm.
stuff like that. Then you get this big COVID news. Also today, breaking is the bowl schedule was released. So I mean, how much leeway does the Big Ten really have with these games? And then Pac-12, who comes back next week, how much
Yeah.
leeway do they have with the bowl schedules already getting released? How much leeway does the college football playoff committee give them and let them, into the conversation of making the top four?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where these conferences went wrong. Like if they were going to be canceled, then just be canceled and don't play. But when the Big Ten came out and said we're canceling, we're done, we're not playing, and then you come back as late as you did, you look at the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, they allowed for bye weeks, they allowed for games to be moved. They said you're going to play 10 games no matter what, because we have from end of September to the middle of December, we're playing 10 games in that time frame, and I think Wisconsin, a lot of it goes on them for positive COVID tests, but some of it falls on the Big Ten for not allowing them to make up these games. And I think you're right. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, if Wisconsin goes 5-0, 6-0, that I think in a lot of people's minds, 5-0 losing to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game and finishing the year 5-1 is nowhere close to Oklahoma State going undefeated in the Big 12 or Georgia with one loss in the regular season in the SEC. Like you're having a very hard time comparing these teams, and
Mhm.
um, I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's a million different ways it could go.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. And I don't think this is going to be the last positive case within a team
Mm-mm.
in the Big Ten. I think you're going to see more. And I think going forward, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yep.
We'll move on to the Big 12 uh, conference you're all familiar with.
My
And
conference, man.
we'll get right into it with Iowa State and Oklahoma State. Uh, Oklahoma State pulling out the win, remaining undefeated, not only
Hmm.
in the conference but throughout the year. They're 4-0 now. They win 24-21. Get Spencer Sanders back. Brees Hall, I'm impressed with Brees Hall. He's leading the nation right now in yards per game. Had a really good game against a good Oklahoma State defense, but they weren't able to pull out the victory. What did you take away from this game?
Well, a lot of things. Being an Iowa State fan, it- my thing with Iowa State is, remember week 1 they lost Louisiana. Kansas State lost to Arkansas State. Both schools have kind of rode that out, figured it out, gotten better. The biggest thing for me when I watched that game at the beginning of the year was how conservative and uh, just nonchalant Iowa State was offensively. They didn't take any shots. They were down the field. They went to the same. They threw to the same 2 or 3 guys. Offensively, that was tough to watch, and that's the ultimate reason I think why they lost. Same thing again this week. They threw to only 4 guys had a catch, and they didn't take shots downfield. Now credit a lot of that to Oklahoma State's defense, but um, I was at the game. I think it was 2 weeks ago now or 3 weeks ago against Texas Tech at home for Iowa State, and I think like 10 guys caught a ball. So it was much different defenses, yes, but it was a lot more aggressive. It was a lot more downfield. It was little swing routes. It was wide receiver screens. It was a lot of different route combinations, complexity, things like that. Um, but I did take away from Oklahoma State that I think Oklahoma State's defense in the Big 12 this year, where Oklahoma is not as high powered offensively, Texas is good offensively, but not to the level of Big 12 offenses in the past. I think Oklahoma State's defense really impressed me, and I think that is going to be what keeps them in these games because they still have to play Texas, they still have to play Oklahoma, they still have to play Kansas State. I think their defense is going to be what ultimately probably wins them the Big 12.
Yeah. They've got a very good defense and seem to be one of the only teams in the Big 12 that actually plays defense. So I think that's a big
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, I mean, Iowa State and Oklahoma State are the 2 best defenses in the conference by far, I think, and um, I mean, Iowa State pretty much held Oklahoma in check. I think you're going
mhm.
to see the same thing from Oklahoma State when they play Oklahoma and Texas. I think you're going to see games in the 20s and the 30s, not in the 60s and 70s like we're used to seeing.
Yeah. Uh, Next game we'll talk about is Kansas State against Kansas. Kansas State rolling in this one, 55-14. And my big question is Kansas like the worst Power 5 team to ever play?
Yeah, I think they are, and their best player opted out,
Yep.
Puka Williams. So I think I mean Kansas State's a good team, but I think Kansas can't do anything offensively, and I've been telling you fade Kansas until they cover the spread, and
Mm,
um, they can't score, right?
yeah.
Like they can't put up points.
No, they can't do anything offensively. And I mean, they've got Les Miles. So if Les Miles can't figure out a program like that, I don't know who can.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, Kansas is a basketball school, and that's all that I think that they're ever going to be.
Yeah,
And I think if you're a Kansas fan or a student, you just say we got 3 weeks until basketball season, and that's all you're focused on.
exactly. Next game is Oklahoma and TCU. Oklahoma pulling this one out 33-14. TCU held them in check for the most part. Spencer Rattler's starting to figure it out a little bit. He's got a solid connection with Marvin Mims, who had a big day, over 100
Hmm.
yards, 2 touchdown catches. And yeah, I mean, I think Oklahoma's starting to figure it out a little,
Yeah.
but it's still not, like you said, the offenses that we've seen in the last couple of years where they're flying all over the field, up and down, and can score on anybody.
Yeah, yeah, and you look, they've also always had a big time wide receiver that is a surefire NFL high caliber guy, and they just don't really have a. I mean, they have a lot of good wide receivers. They don't have that guy this year,
Mhm.
and I think their top three running backs from last year that were coming back are not playing. I think one Sermon transferred, the other two I think opted out or got injured or something. So. Um, and I mean, I think Rattler, like, he's great. He's a highly recruited, highly touted freshman, but he doesn't have experience, right? Like you can't forget that. You can't um you have to remember that even though it is the Big 12 and not a lot of defense is played and all these things that have been going on in the past, Lincoln Riley's great offensive coach, all, yada yada yada, college football is a different animal than high school
Yeah.
football, and I think he's just take some time, and
Yeah.
I think next year you want to put a bet in for him to win the Heisman. I think that's a good value at wherever he's at, because he's gonna be on that level next year and the year after that.
Right. Well, and like these big, like you said, he's still a freshman. Some of these big games where teams are a little better defensively, he's made the mistakes. It's not necessarily the scheme. It's, some of this has been on him because he's made the
Mhm.
mistakes and he's still a freshman. So he's still learning. He's still figuring
Mhm.
things out. Um, so, like you said, you got to give him that time to develop. Next year, Oklahoma will probably be back to being Oklahoma.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I agree.
not terrible. But looking at the next game, their rival Texas beats Baylor 27-16. They were up 27-3 going into the fourth, give up 13 points to Baylor. So scores a little closer, but ultimately Texas was in full control throughout this game. Um, the one thing I'm concerned with about Texas is the fact that it seems like it's all Sam Ellinger. They don't have
Mhm.
much of a running game outside of him, and they're starting to get things together defensively a little bit. I mean, Baylor, who knows? You can't really tell that much.
Mhm.
But, my big concern is that Ellinger seems to have to do it all.
Yeah, and I think you look back at the Oklahoma Texas game. I think that was a big uh showing of Ellinger having to do it all. I mean, he had to run for touchdowns, he had to run for first downs, he had to make every throw in the book. Baylor's a tough team. That was only their third game this year. They've had a lot of uh, problems with COVID and stuff like that. But Texas, man, I think you look at them and you still don't know what they are, right? Like, it seems like since Tom Herman has been there, they you just don't know what they are. They beat Georgia, in that Sugar Bowl game, and everyone was like, Ellinger's coming back, they're going to be good. Their defense is terrible. Their offense just isn't what it can be, I think, for Texas, with all the
Especially with
recruits they have.
Yeah, especially with all the recruits they're getting.
Yeah.
You kind of, I mean, their offense leaves more to be desired because
Yep.
they're getting all these big name recruits, and yet they're not, showing out. From one week,
Hmm.
they could look awesome on offense, look great, look like everything's there, and then the next week they go out and it's like, okay, where was this offense that we saw last week?
I think that they're a team that really plays their competition, because
Mhm.
Baylor's not a good team in the Big Ten, and I know like you mentioned, the score is a little deceiving, but you would think then that why not? Why can't, like, they could have beaten Baylor 42-0 if they wanted to, or 42-10 or something like that, and they didn't. But then they go out and they put up 70 points or whatever it was against Oklahoma, right? Like, they this week they're out on the road at Oklahoma State, and then they play. Um, home against West Virginia, and those are two very different teams, right?
Mhm.
Like Oklahoma State's really good and West Virginia's middle of the road. And I think it'll be interesting to see those two games how they come out, because you're talking about they could play Oklahoma State really close, and then they could play West Virginia really close. And those will be, if you watch those games, you'll say these are two different football teams out here for Texas, right? So
Right.
I think they're a team that just plays their competition, and I'm interested to see how they finish the year, because they still have some tough games on their schedule.
Yep. Definitely interested to see them going forward. Next game, West Virginia at Texas Tech. Texas Tech pulls this one out 34-27. I don't have much on this. It's a game between two teams kind of in the middle or
Hmm.
towards the bottom. It doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah, yeah, not much here. I think a guy to keep an eye on is West Virginia's running back, Letty Brown.
Mhm.
He's big running back, physical running back. Um, I, I, not much for me either, but I think that's a guy that he's a junior this year, probably will be back next year. Just kind of a guy to watch if you catch a West Virginia game, or looking at your NFL team who they could draft next couple years. Just maybe a guy to keep an eye on. But yeah, I don't really have anything either. I think both these teams are middle of the road. They got head coaches still trying to figure it out. It's just kind of a ho hum Big 12
Yeah.
game.
Last thing I have to note about the Big 12, you've got two undefeateds left in conference play, one being Kansas State, the other being Oklahoma State. In my mind, if you're the Big 12, I mean, I know you're not really supposed to root for your conferences or like your enemies or
Hmm.
whatever, but at the
Hmm.
same time, if you're the Big 12, you got to look at these two undefeateds and you got to say, okay, I hope Oklahoma State wins out. Kansas State, like you said, they've got that glaring loss to Arkansas State, and you can't get into the playoff with that loss.
No, no, and I agree. As an Iowa State fan, as a fan of the Big 12, I do root for a team to get in the college football playoff, or get a big time bowl game that we can showcase the conference on. Kansas State's not going to get that opportunity. They're not. They're Kansas State. Oklahoma State can, but the conference is Oklahoma and Texas. When the conference doesn't have a good Oklahoma or Texas team, the conference as a whole suffers, and that's just the way it goes. I mean, that's the same thing with a lot of conferences, right? When the Big Ten doesn't have Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State, the conference suffers. When
The
it's just it's the
Pac-12,
way it goes.
yeah,
When the Pac-12 doesn't have a good USC or Oregon, someone like that, it suffers. And I think that's the same thing with the Big 12. I mean Oklahoma State would have to win out, beat Oklahoma convincingly, beat Texas convincingly, win the Big 12 championship against probably one of those schools, if not Iowa State, or Kansas State, and they'd have to make a really good push.
yeah.
I think.
They've got a really tough 3-game stretch here. They've got
Hmm.
Texas this week, Kansas State next week, and then Oklahoma. I don't know if they have to beat them convincingly. I just think they have to. Their defense has to convince people, because if they play well enough on defense and shut these high-powered offenses down in Texas, Oklahoma, then I think that's enough of a statement that, hey, this defense is good enough to compete with all these high-flying offenses. Why not
Yeah,
give them a shot?
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah,
That's for sure. Um, I can do the recap of the SEC if that's where we want to go
yeah,
uh, next. There's only 4 games this past week. We'll start with, I think, probably the biggest news of last weekend. Alabama beat Tennessee but lost Jalen Waddle. I think it was the first play of the game, is that he was returning the opening kickoff.
yeah.
Couldn't really see exactly from everything I saw, but how it happened, but dislocated the ankle, done for the year. Really hope that he gets that figured out for the NFL draft, because he's going to be a guy that it kind of seemed like everyone was saying, you got Ruggs, you got Judy, but Jalen Waddle is the guy,
Yeah.
and really hope he gets it. He gets that figured out. But Alabama, another convincing win, 48-17, on the road against Rocky Top, and I kind of want to get your opinion on this. You can give me your thoughts on the game, but where do you think Mac Jones is in the Heisman conversation or in the topic of quarterbacks of this year and going into the NFL draft?
That's an interesting point. I think in the Heisman conversation, he's got to be, you know, amongst the people going to New York right now,
Hmm.
especially after the Georgia game. He had a great game against Georgia, so
Yep.
I think that puts him in just because it's a big game and he stepped up. He played very well. So I think he's up there for the Heisman conversation. I think his draft stock is rising. I wouldn't say he's a first rounder, but second, third round, second day,
Yeah.
probably is right around where he's at right now.
Hmm.
Again, he
Hmm.
could play his way into the first round, but right now I'd still say second day guy.
Hmm.
I kind of
I
want to
agree
touch
with
on
you.
the Waddle injury as
Yeah.
well.
Hmm.
I mean, it sucks for him especially, but at the end of the day, this is Alabama, and they've got Mechie, a young
Yeah.
guy who can plug right in there, and
Yeah.
they'll be fine. They'll keep rolling. It sucks um, for him, but if you look at Alabama, they'll be all right without him. Tennessee is a team who started off strong, but it's kind of wavered away here lately.
Man, Tennessee, their quarterback. Whoa. I mean, he's I think the only thing that keeps him having a job is he's a fifth year senior, right? Like, I mean, isn't that the only thing that they can say? Well, we got to keep him in there for that because I mean, he didn't throw any interceptions, but he doesn't give them an opportunity to win. Like he doesn't help that team. I don't think.
No, he doesn't help the team, and I mean, like you said, he doesn't throw interceptions, but at the same time, he's not very accurate.
No.
So when you're missing a
Mhm.
lot of your passes, it doesn't matter if you're throwing
Mhm.
interceptions or not. You're not moving the football. You're getting
Yeah.
out there 3-and-outs and stuff like that, and you got to move the football.
Mhm. And Alabama's defense isn't what it used to be, but I think kind of what I'm thinking with Alabama is their defense is good enough to get them the football, keep opponents to 21, 28 points because their offense is going to score more. Right? Like their defense just has to keep the other team from scoring enough, get the football back to their offense enough because they know that Alabama offense is going to put up points on anyone. I mean, we saw them put up was what they did they break 50 against Georgia? I mean,
It was 41.
they put up 41 points on essentially what people were saying was the best defense in the
Yeah.
country, best secondary in the country, and they threw it all over the yard. I mean, that's all how good their defense has to be this year,
hmm
and that's I think that's right where they feel comfortable, right? I mean,
Well, and another thing too, it helps when you have a guy like Najee Harris. You can
yeah,
control the clock if they
hmm
wanted to. I mean, Alabama the last couple of years has a little more high-powered offense than we're used to.
hmm
If Saban wanted to, he could turn back to his old ways and just run the ball, control the clock, keep the other team off the field. And
yeah,
giving your defense that rest with that type of running back also helps because they're fresh.
yeah. No more 9-6 game against that LSU
Yeah.
for Alabama, but um, speaking of LSU, uh, freshman quarterback started for them against a decent defense in South Carolina, but they put the hurt on South Carolina 52-24. Um, I think a lot of people were kind of still thinking highly of South Carolina coming off that win, that big emotional win against Auburn, but I mean LSU just made them look silly. And there's no Joe Burrow, there's no Justin Jefferson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, there's not even Jameer Chase, and they still put up 52 points against a decent defense. I mean, I don't know if you watched the game, if you have any thoughts on them because they've kind of been up and down this year, but um,
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts. I mean, South Carolina by no means a great offense, but they're a pretty good offense. The one thing I noted is LSU's starting to figure things out
hmm
defensively,
hmm
starting to get it going. Last year they didn't have necessarily a great defense either. It's just kind of the new system LSU's in is they've got a little more
yeah.
weapons on offense, a little
Is
more high powered.
Stingley's playing for them, isn't he?
Yes,
The
he's
cornerback? Yeah.
back playing.
He makes a difference.
He does make a difference. He can shut down one side of the field completely make you go to the other side. So that's huge. They Another thing I want to say too is like they've got a lot of young guys starting.
Yeah.
I mean, they lost a lot of talent. You mentioned a couple of them on both sides of the ball, and it's kind of I wouldn't say rebuild necessarily, but it is kind of a rebuild year for them. Get these guys experience. They started with Brennan to start out the year, didn't work out. Now they've got a freshman coming in playing quarterback, and it's getting the experience for these younger guys so they can make a shot, make a run next year. And that's
Yeah.
what I kind of think they're going for.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Brennan got hurt, and I think he's still out for this upcoming game. So I think that Finley freshman kid's going to start again. I mean, it's you got to replace almost everybody in that offense. Brady's gone. I mean, you'd like to think LSU is up there with Alabama and Ohio State, where it's reload, not rebuild. But um, I mean, I think
Yeah, so
I agree with you. This is going to be a team that next year is going to be
yes.
a very, very good team.
Well, and
Um,
if Finley if he plays well enough this weekend, if Brennan comes back, I don't know if you give him the job back because again, you're already 2 losses in.
mhm,
You're not
mhm.
really shooting for the championship game. I mean, you can try it, but chances are you're not going to make it there. So I think, right now you have to go with Finley. You got to let him build, develop, so that way next year you're ready to roll.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Are you a big Mizzou Tiger fan?
I am
Being a
not.
St. Louis kid?
I'm not really. Never really have been, but it,
That was a good win for them. They've
yeah,
got a couple good wins this year. Another team I don't think they're a team that I don't think belongs in the SEC. Kind of think that was a bad move. I think that was just them chasing the extra dollar, leaving the Big 12. Um, but beat LSU. Now they beat Kentucky, 20-10. Kentucky's not a good football team, but don't want to take anything away from Missouri because they've struggled in the SEC, kind of like we talked about Rutgers struggling in the Big Ten, not quite to that extent, but they're 2-2. Um, I mean, I didn't watch any of this game. I don't have a lot of thoughts on this game other than Kentucky's just not a good team, but Missouri's got a couple tough games here in Florida and Georgia, but there's a chance. I mean, kind of looking at their schedule, there's a chance they find themselves sitting with 5 wins, 6 wins. Um, I don't know. I just I don't have much on this game, but
yeah,
I'm hats off to Missouri winning 2 SEC games. I think that's a nice thing, and another team you cheer for, like we talked about with Northwestern and Rutgers, just a team you cheer for.
yeah. I mean, Mizzou, like you said, hasn't really done anything, and the SEC, they've got a nice freshman quarterback in Bazelak who's played pretty well this year. I didn't watch the game either, but I know he's been playing pretty well. He hasn't done too much to hurt them. He's done more to help them actually. So that's all you can really ask for from a freshman quarterback is to
Hmm.
see that and see him grow throughout the year.
Yeah.
They've got a new head coach in Drinkwitz who's done a pretty good job in his first year. So I guess they're trending in the right direction. We'll
Yeah.
see. Only time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just hats off to Mizzou. Terry Wilson of Kentucky, their quarterback, went 4 for 11 for 38 yards. They played Georgia. We'll get into this, but they played Georgia this Saturday, and don't want to be him dropping back in the pocket this weekend. That's for sure.
No,
Um, Last game in the SEC, Auburn and Old Miss down there in the Grove, 38-25, 35-28 Auburn. Auburn's a team that I mean, we know LSU, we know Ole Miss is bad, right? Lane Kiffin's
right.
first year, trying to get it figured out. Defense is horrible, but I kind of hit on this with Texas, a team that plays their competition. I think Auburn's kind of in that same boat, but offensively, man, like they're so inconsistent offensively. Bo Nix is like you like to think that he's good, but then he does things where you're like,
Yeah.
are you a JV high school quarterback? Like what, what are you doing? And I mean, it's a game they had to win. It's a game you have to win if you're in the SEC and want to compete. Um, but I came away from this game thinking, man, Auburn, man, they're gonna get wrecked by Alabama. They're gonna get wrecked by, you know, Georgia or whoever top SEC team they have to play. Like they're not what we hope Auburn is every year.
Right. Well, and not only that, they've had a couple calls from the refs this year that have really
Yeah,
been costly to some
yeah.
people. So a lot of people complaining about the refs. Saw Lane Kiffin complaining. The SEC even came out and made a statement that, hey, our refs screwed up.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Which
then,
is the worst thing, by the way.
yeah, you
There's
can't.
no rhyme or reason for that.
Yeah, you can't come out and say that and then not do anything about it.
Mhm. Mhm.
I also kind of want to talk about Matt Corral for Ole Miss. I mean, he started out, he played really well at the beginning of the year, and now, I mean, he's making a lot of mistakes.
Oh man, dude. And they have another quarterback. I watched some of their games last year. They have another quarterback, Plumlee, who's
Mhm.
more of a runner, not quite fits Lane Kiffin's offensive style, but I mean, don't you throw him in there just to see what happens at some point? Like, why? You can't. You lose these games. Your defense gives up 1,000 points, but you lose these games, and then you just keep throwing the corral kid out there and hoping something happens. Like, don't you want to change? Don't you want to give it some sort of switch where you can say, hey, at least we know it doesn't work with this kid either, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
I
well, I mean, some of these games are coming down to, him making one mistake and
mm-hmm.
costing the game. And it's at some point, like you said, you got to be like, okay, let's at least try something so we know where we have to go going forward.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I'm a little frustrated by that maybe, but again, you weren't expected to do well this year. You weren't expected to win games this year, so um yeah, I don't know. I think Kiffin's a good coach. I think we'll get it figured out. Give him some time, but um move on to your conference, the American Conference. There was a big game in the conference this weekend. I think the biggest game of the weekend going into the weekend. I thought this was the top game to keep an eye on. Cincinnati at SMU. Cincinnati looked very impressive, I thought, defensively anyway. I think offensively they still need to kind of get it figured out if they want to get to where they want to go. But defensively held that SMU offense that just goes up and down the field on people to 13 points. I know SMU's missing their top two playmakers
Mhm.
due to injury, but I mean, I think Cincinnati, man, I think that they are a very, very good football team. I came away impressed with them. I came away thinking that this is a team that could play with 95% of teams in the country. I mean, I think Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State probably not, but I think this is the team I came away with saying they're a team that right now deserves to be playing on January 1st in a big time bowl game. And this is your conference. I'll let you speak on it a little more, but that's what I came away thinking.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, Cincinnati looks great defensively. Like you said, stopping a team that moves the ball up and down like SMU does. Missing a couple playmakers, but still, you still got Shane Buechele in there at quarterback. They played really well defensively. Uh, Later in the game, though, they had a couple playmakers on defense. Cincinnati did go down with injuries, so I think it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that going into their game tomorrow. Cincinnati, though, like you said, right now looks like the team destined for a New Year's Six Bowl, and this New Year's Six Bowl really has become the AAC's to lose in the last couple of
Hmm.
years. And
Yeah.
I mean, the AAC this year is a lot deeper than people probably give them credit for. You've got Cincinnati, you've got SMU, Memphis is still good, Tulsa's good. They played Oklahoma State pretty
Hmm.
close earlier in the year. Still got UCF, my team. Houston's looked pretty good too. Um,
Yeah.
their only losses to BYU, and
82 points on that Houston over under
yeah,
with UCF. Wow.
yeah,
Um, I mean, just for comparison, Cincinnati held SMU to 290 yards the past two SMU games, Memphis and Tulane, not exactly top defenses, but they put over 500 yards against
Right.
both those teams.
Mhm.
Yeah, just an impressive feat by them. You mentioned Tulsa. They played on Friday night, played UCF. You asked me if I thought Kansas was the worst Power Five team or worst team in Division One football. UCF is close to Kansas's level.
You mean USF?
USF, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. Tulsa has looked good this year, but USF is not a good football team.
Yeah. I mean, they had a good year back in 2017.
Yeah. Was that
Um,
Flowers was their quarterback back then?
they had a good year then, and then ever since then they've been on the downfall. They're trying to figure things out.
Hmm.
Seems like nothing's working for them. So I mean, yeah, they're pretty much the doormat of the conference right now, trying to figure things out with their coaches and just with their team in general.
Yeah, I do like Houston, or excuse me, Tulsa. You touched on it there a little bit about Tulsa. I think they're a team that can just kind of hang around, and then maybe they get one or two wins at the end of the year, and they're right there in the American Conference. Especially with Central Florida, your team having a couple losses and already beating them. Tulsa has. Um, I think Tulsa's a team that didn't expect for them to be here, especially when their starting running back got injured. But
Right.
I think they're a team that deserves to be there at the top of the American standings with the way they've played so far.
Yeah. Well, and they end the season though with pretty tough stretch. Their last four games are hosting SMU, hosting Tulane, who hasn't won a game in conference but has been very competitive
Mhm.
nonetheless. At
Mhm.
Houston and then hosting Cincinnati. So that's a tough
Mhm.
four-game stretch to end the season for them. So we'll see how they look, at the end of the year. Like you said, they beat UCF, looked good in that game, came from behind to beat them. They've got a pretty stingy defense as well.
Mhm.
Held Oklahoma State in check that first game of the year, held UCF in check their second game of the year. So they've got a really stingy defense and something to keep an eye out going forward.
Yeah, I agree. Your UCF Knights 51, Tulane 34. Like I said earlier, over under with their game with Houston's in the 80s. They put up a lot of points. Put up another 50 point game. They've got two losses, but in conference play to Tulsa and Memphis, but still feel like I don't know. I still feel like the conference every year is UCF's to lose. Am I wrong in thinking that? Am I right in thinking that? Kind of what's your feel on that?
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think the thing is with UCF, since they've made all this national headlines with all of the UCF Twitter mafia is what they call it. They go after everybody and make everybody aware that UCF is a good team.
Mhm.
And the thing is, the last couple of years, they've been getting every team's in the conference's best shot.
Yeah.
Every team wants to beat them because they know they've got all this hype and all this Twitter mafia around them. So
Mhm.
they get everybody's best shot. And like you said, I mean, they've got the two losses, but they're still a team that you can't take lightly. This offense is something very, very good. Move the ball on almost everybody.
Yeah, I feel like every year there's the best team in the conference. I think every year that game between them and Memphis, going into the year is usually the biggest AAC game.
Mhm.
Um, speaking
Usually
of
that.
Memphis, 41-29 beat Temple. I don't have much on this game. I didn't watch this game.
Mm,
Don't have much on it. I know Memphis is uh, still up there in the top of the standings, but I think that they're a good team, not a great team. But they picked up another win against Temple, who I think only played their second game of the year. So
mhm. Yeah,
or third game of the year.
yeah, I don't have much on this. I mean, Memphis, like you said, still up towards the top. I agree that they're good, not great. And why they're not great is because they don't really play defense this year.
Hmm.
They're giving up over 500 yards a game. So when that happens, I think they're actually giving up the most yards per game in the country. So
Tough
when
to win
that
games that
happens,
way.
yeah, you can't expect to win too many more games with that.
Yeah, 500 yards to Temple.
Mhm.
I mean, 500 yards to Temple, who I don't know. I don't know anything about Temple football, right? Like they're not. I
They're
don't
not
know.
anything special. So
Right. Last game in the conference, Houston 37, Navy 21. Um, Again, I don't have anything really on this game. Houston's an interesting team. I think that they're a team that you just associate points with, especially now they have Holgerson down there. Marquez Stevenson, always a fun guy to watch, guy that's going to be playing on Sundays, no doubt for Houston. But um, yeah, I mean, I don't really have much on this game. I think Houston's again a decent team, but uh, I think that this was just like a just an average American conference game
yeah.
where it
Well,
is what it is.
I think we'll find out a lot about Houston this weekend. Like you've mentioned, they
Hmm.
play UCF. So we'll see how they look against them. Probably going to be a ton of points. Marquez Stevenson is probably the best receiver in the conference. Number wise, it shows you that Marlon Williams and Jalen Robinson of UCF are, but I think talent wise, Marquez Stevenson's probably the best receiver in the conference. And like you said, he's probably going to be playing on Sundays.
Yeah,
Uh, Definitely a name to watch out for.
yeah, he's been impressive. I think he's a guy that he's one of those guys you get the ball to him any way you can and kind of
Mhm.
just let and see what happens.
Yeah.
We can move now to the ACC. I don't have a lot for this conference in general, just because I think it's Clemson's to lose. Obviously, the news came out. We'll start there. They won 47-21 against Syracuse. Came out the other day. Trevor Lawrence tested positive. He's going to miss their game this week, but Clemson struggled against a bad Syracuse team. I think the takeaway from this game for me was number one, I think Clemson can't have any more games like this if they want to get that one seed, as we talked about earlier. But also, I think it also shows Syracuse is a bad team that is still willing to put up a fight.
Yeah.
And then that's good to see. I mean, they like their head coach. I think Dino Babers is a good head coach, but I mean, Clemson still won by 26, and they're a good football team, and I still think you keep them at number one until they're proven otherwise.
I'd agree on a couple things I got to say about the game too. Is I think more of the struggle was on the offensive side of things. The
Hmm.
defense is actually top 10 in the country this year. They gave up one big play that went for 83 yards to the
Yeah.
house. If
Yep.
you take away that play, there's not much there for Syracuse offense. And Trevor Lawrence throws his first pick six. So I think it was more of an offensive struggle for Clemson in this game. I don't really think it was as close as
No. No.
sometimes it really was.
I mean, I think Syracuse cut it to like 6 or 7 at one point, but at no point, if I'm a Clemson fan, did I ever feel like this game was close. I agree the score made it closer than it seems like, but yeah, I don't think Syracuse, or excuse me, I don't think Clemson ever felt pressured in this game.
Well, and not only that, you got a big game coming up in a couple weeks. Like you said, Lawrence with the COVID issue. I think if he tests negative next Friday, though, he can play in that game Saturday. So
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
this next week's going to be something to keep an eye on with that COVID test. With the news, I don't know. They're not going to miss him too much this week. We'll
No,
get into it when we
I
look into
mean
the games.
their backup quarterback's a 5-star recruit,
Yes.
right? I mean that. Um, I think it'll be this next week will be interesting with Lawrence. I mean, Nick Saban beat it in like what 3 days, right? I mean that he had his whole thing, so I'm sure Dabo will find some small loophole in the ACC rules and the protocol and get Lawrence back in there. Um, yeah, I think that I think they take care of business even with that backup quarterback. But um,
Yeah. Oh,
um,
the only other things I've got for the
mhm,
ACC are teams. We always say year in, year out, it's Clemson and everybody else. This year, you add Notre Dame, makes it a little more interesting.
mhm,
But I think there's four programs that are trending in the right direction with newer head coaches, either first year or a couple years in. I've got Georgia Tech. I think, while they haven't been too impressive, they've done some things that, getting in the right direction. They've got
mhm,
a freshman quarterback starting. If he takes care of the ball a little more, they're a little more competitive in some of these games. Miami, I think they're trending upwards. They got crushed by Clemson, but the last couple weeks, winning games, yeah, they didn't look pretty against Virginia, but sometimes you just need to win those gritty
yep,
games and just grind those out to get a win. I think Diaz is a very good coach. He's got the program going back in the right direction. Boston College has a first year head coach, and a lot of people didn't expect much from them this year, yet they are sitting with 4 wins right now. And then North Carolina, a lot of hype around them this year coming in. Had the unfortunate upset against Florida State, but I still think they're going in the right direction with Mac
mhm.
Brown.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think North Carolina, very good offensive program. Mac Brown's North Carolina is a great state that produces high school football talent. I think Mac Brown's going to recruit that state very well. You can out recruit Duke and NC State and Wake Forest for in-state excuse me in-state recruits, but yeah, Sam Howell, man, that we can get into this if we want to talk about Heisman candidates, but Sam Howell, very good this year, NFL quarterback for sure.
Mhm.
Um, Georgia Tech, I like your point about Georgia Tech. The thing you have to remember too is when you have a triple option offense, I think they said they had like almost 20 running backs on scholarship. I mean, you just you I like to see new coaches come in and give time. 4, 5 years is how long these coaches have to turn these programs around, especially at a
So
school like Georgia
yeah,
Tech.
it's only his
I mean,
second year, and they've
yeah.
starting to look a lot better.
hmm Speaking of North Carolina, they won 48-21 against NC State. This game was a little close. NC State, I remember I watched most of this game. NC State had a play. I don't remember if it was on third or fourth down, missed wide open guy in the end zone, dropped the ball, would have made it, I think, a one score game or like a 3 point game, something like that. Would have made it really a lot closer. Kind of changed the whole outcome of the game when he dropped that because in North Carolina, I think, went down and scored. And
Mhm.
um, they had the loss at Florida State, but North Carolina, I think, is I think Notre Dame's in the ACC this year, yes, but they're not really an ACC school.
Mhm.
So for just means of this statement, not counting Notre Dame, North Carolina is the second best team I think this year in the ACC. I know Miami's ranked higher than them, um, but I think North Carolina has a lot of good talent. Mac Brown's a good head coach. I think they're the best opportunity for the field to beat
Yes.
Clemson.
I'd agree. And something else to note, you talked about Sam Howell. He hasn't had to play as great as he played as a freshman,
hmm
mainly because they've probably got the best 1-2 running back combination that nobody talks about. Carter
hmm
and Williams coming into this game were both in the top 10 in yards per game. They both average over 100 yards per game. So when you've got that paired with Sam Howell and some of the receiving talent that they have, I mean, this is a dangerous team going forward. I
Yeah.
think they play Notre Dame later on, and I think that'll be a very good game to watch.
Yeah. I mean, looking at their schedule, they put up points on just about anyone. Defense could probably get a little better. Um, they play a tough stretch of Notre Dame at home and then at Miami. Tough stretch for them, but I do like North Carolina um, in the ACC to challenge Clemson. Next game, we'll move to Notre Dame, 45-3 over Pitt. think a lot of people thought this game was going to be closer than it really was. I don't have much on this game. I think Notre Dame's another team that kind of just plays their competition, doesn't play well enough to really wow you. But this, I think, was a big win that they needed to beat an opponent this bad. Um, I don't know. I still don't know what to make of Ian Book.
Yeah.
I mean,
I, if you want to win the big games, I don't think he's the answer personally.
hmm
But the thing is, I think Notre Dame has one of the better defenses in the
yeah,
country. I
yeah,
do
I
think
agree
the
with you.
defense is legit, and I think Ian Book can do enough to keep you in those big games, but I don't think he's going to win them for you. And I
hmm
think you need somebody that's going to win them for you. So I'm really interested to see them in that Clemson game. But I don't know if Ian Book's the guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he started his freshman year. He's in his junior year now, and it's just. I mean, you're 2.5 years of a starter, and people still I think don't know. Are you an NFL caliber quarterback? Are you just a good college quarterback? So I think that's just an interesting thing to watch. I'm assuming he'll be back next year, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes for them. Um, you you touched on the Miami Virginia game, 19-14. Miami won that one. I watched a little bit of this game. I think it was the weather wasn't great down there in during the game, but a gritty win by Miami, and like I 100% agree with you. Sometimes it's an ugly loss, but sometimes a team needs an ugly loss because they come back later in the year and they say, "Hey guys, we've been here before. We've done this. We've won a game where we're not playing our best. We can do it again." Um, I I listen. I've recommended this podcast to you and a couple of our friends, the Stanford Steve and the Bear podcast. They mentioned it on their Virginia has like, or maybe it was on Scott Van Pelt's show, but Virginia has like three different quarterbacks that have played this year, and I think one of them the other day took a snap wearing the number 98. Like they had a quarterback wearing the number 98 take a snap for them. I mean, they're just a weird team. Like they're 1-4. They're not a football team, a football school, but just a weird team. But good win for Miami, and I think that I mean, they got embarrassed by Clemson, but I still think they're a decent football team.
I'd agree. Yep.
Um, I mean, a couple other games if we want to hit on them. Boston College beat Georgia Tech 48-27. I don't really have anything on that game. Wake Forest beat Virginia Tech 23-16. The only thing I have is Virginia Tech is
They
I
they
don't
had a
know.
lot of
Like
they
they're
had a lot of turnovers in that game too. This is another
yeah.
game where the turnovers kind of indicated
hmm
the outcome of the game. I think Wake Forest is not terrible. I think they're in the middle of the road. They played a really close game against NC State earlier in the year that they probably could have won, but didn't. They're kind of a middle of the road team though. Kind of interesting. They sneak up
Yeah.
on teams. They play all
Yeah.
right defensively, but middle of the road. Probably a situation where Virginia Tech's kicking themselves going back to the locker room because you can't lose that game.
No, if you want to be number 19 in the country and if you want to be a top 6 school in the ACC football rankings, you can't lose to Wake Forest. You just can't. Um, Only other game in the ACC that we haven't talked about: Louisville 48, Florida State 16. I think a lot of people saw this coming from Florida State. You get the big home win against North Carolina, come out the next week on the road against Louisville, who's not a great team. Lose that game. I don't really have anything on it. I think Florida State's a team that, if you trust in Mike Norvell and he's the guy, you have to give him some time, like we just mentioned. But um, I mean, Blackman's not the answer. They finally benched him and went with Travis. I think that's still. I mean, they lost big today or last week, but I still think he's the guy for them going forward.
I'd agree. He's the guy going forward. I do think Mike Norvell's a good coach. We saw what he did at Memphis. It's going to take time, like you said. He's got to get his guys in there.
hmm
I don't think some of these guys really want to play this year for Florida
No.
State. So, and it kind of shows in some of these games. Some of these games, like North Carolina, they come out play, and then other games, it's a big letdown.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with you. Only other game I had to talk about was BYU, just because they're ranked 12th in the country last week. I think they moved up one spot to 11 this week. Um, I've watched a few of their games now. I've been on the Zach Wilson train, quarterback for them. I think he's a very, very good quarterback. He's got NFL on him. He's got, I think, first round written on him. I put him ahead of Trey Lance, the North Dakota State quarterback. And still behind Fields and Lawrence, obviously. But I'm impressed with BYU. Um, I am. I wanted to get your thoughts. You being an American guy, American football guy. Would you BYU play Cincinnati? Are you taking BYU or are you taking Cincinnati? Because I think right now those are the two best non-Power 5 schools, pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
I think I go BYU. What about you?
I think I would go Cincinnati, and I'd go by. I think the spread. I would think it would. First off, I think Cincinnati would be favored. I think
Yeah.
they'd be
Okay.
favored only by like 5, 6 points. Nothing too
Ne-
big.
Neutral
Um,
site.
yeah, neutral
Yep.
site. I
Mhm.
think not too big of a favorite, but I still think Cincinnati would be favored, and I do think they'd win. Thing you got to remember with BYU, this is a weird year, uh,
Mhm.
but they haven't really played anybody of note.
Yeah.
And that's actually one thing I want to talk about is the game, not this week for them, but next week is their big game, big chance to make a statement because they've got Boise State
Yeah.
at Boise State Friday night, that blue turf. If they're going to make a statement, make their case for the New Year's Six, it's got to be next weekend.
How and Boise State played this last week. How have the blue jerseys for Boise State at home not been outlawed? Like how are they still allowed to wear blue jerseys on a blue turf? I don't understand that.
Yeah, and I mean, back in the 2000s where they were just coming up, it was a cool thing.
Hmm.
They had that blue turf, the home field advantage, all that, but now it's just kind of ridiculous.
I have to think that I have to think that it creates a competitive advantage
Yeah.
for Boise State. I really do.
Especially when they're not wearing, I mean, it's strictly all blue and they
Hmm.
don't wear like
Hmm.
anything white. They all have
Yeah.
like blue cleats and everything like that. They literally have all blue. And like you said, I don't know how they get away with it, but they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Last point I had on BYU was I think I know that right now they're 6-0. They played 6 games. That's probably the most games a team this year has played. Um, but you want to talk about a team that I think that got affected by COVID the most? I think it's BYU
Yeah.
because their schedule going into the year was they loaded up their schedule. Like
Mhm.
they were going to play Memphis, they were going to play Washington State, they were going to play a couple other Pac-12 schools. Don't get to do any of that. You got to scramble to play your schedule. Um, all the other schools out west aren't playing right. To me, they've done a tremendous job making sure that they are playing football because they have guys on this team that are NFL caliber players. They want to get them showcased. They want to make their point that they deserve to be playing in that New Year's Six bowl. Um, their schedule got all messed up, and I give them a tip of the cap for how well they've steered the ship.
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, they really had to adjust. If they played the schedule they originally had and they were undefeated, I think a lot more people would have
Hmm.
taken them serious. It's just unfortunate that they haven't had that schedule. But I mean, if they make a statement against Boise, a lot of people will be respecting them a lot more, in my opinion.
Hmm. Yep, I agree. Any other games you wanna hit on
I
before we
just
move
wanted to
on?
talk real quick about the other two undefeateds in the group of five. Give them a little bit of love.
Yeah,
We got Coastal Carolina
the
undefeated.
Chanticleers, baby,
Yes,
the
but
Fun
I think
Belt.
I think they should be on upset alert this week. They've got Georgia State,
Hmm.
who very easily could have beaten Louisiana earlier in the year. I think that's a good game outside of the Power Five to look out for.
Hmm.
Marshall's undefeated as well. Their schedule isn't very hard either. They
Yeah.
don't really have anybody left on their schedule that's worth noting, and I think they could go undefeated, but they don't really play anybody, so I don't see them taking that New Year's Six over BYU or Cincinnati or
Hmm.
somebody else out of the American.
I agree with you on Marshall. They're undefeated, but they're a team that I feel like people just, with everything going on, I think that they'll quickly fall out of their rankings, even being undefeated, as
Mhm.
the Power Five
More
schools start
games
to
for
figure
them,
it out.
too.
Coastal, uh, ranked 25th. I think they deserve to be ranked earlier. I think they should have been ranked before. Was it 2 weeks ago when they finally got that number by their name?
Yeah, after they beat
Um,
Louisiana.
hmm. Yeah. I agree with you. Tough game. 11 a.m. at Georgia State. Decent team in Georgia State. Tough spot for them. They're up to 20. Got to think if they win this game, they move up a couple more spots. I don't think they're going to be taking anything away from BYU or Cincinnati or anyone anytime soon. But just a team you'd like to see keep winning. Maybe they get to play a Power Five school in a bowl game and just kind of you know feel good for those kids that they're playing good football.
Bring more recognition to the program too, you know.
Absolutely. Get that green turf that they got out there in in Charleston. Some love.